To order the town board meeting for October 14th, 2019 p.m. 2019. The time being 7:04 p.m. Ms. Iker, will you please take roll call?
Mayor Christy Melendez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Bennett.
Here.
Miles Baker.
Here.
Barry Wilson.
Here.
Paul Rennemeyer.
Here.
Tom Jones. David Soslowski.
Here.
Mr. Rennemeyer, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item is review of agenda by the board and addition of items of new business to the agenda for consideration.
Madam Mayor, I move we approve the agenda as presented this evening.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer, the second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett, approving the agenda as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. The agenda is approved unanimously as presented. Item 4, this evening we have a proclamation recognizing National Community Planning Month. Whereas change is constant and affects all cities, towns, counties, and other places. And whereas community planning and plans can help manage change in a way that provides better choices for how citizens work and live. And whereas community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in making choices that determine the future of their community. And whereas the full benefits of planning require public officials and citizens who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation. And whereas the month of October is designated as National Community Planning Month throughout the United States of America and its territories. And whereas the celebration of National Community Planning Month provides an opportunity to recognize the participation and dedication of members of planning commissions and other citizens who have contributed their time and expertise to the improvement of their communities. Now therefore, the town of Windsor, Colorado does hereby proclaim October 2019 as National Community Planning Month in recognition of Windsor's dedication and commitment to community planning, dated this 14th day of October 2019. And with that, we will now proceed to board liaison reports. Town Board Member Baker, Tree Board and Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank you. I have no update on the tree board. The Historic Preservation Commission met last Wednesday for a work session, and there was just discussion on some interpretive signage, potentially 2 signs around Windsor Lake discussing the significance of water in northern Colorado and Windsor. And that was it.
Okay. Town Board Member Wilson, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Advisory Board, Poudre River Trail Corridor.
With the Poudre River Trail, the big news the last few weeks has been the GOCO grant, which is Great Outdoors Colorado, $2 million grant with Windsor, Larimer County, Timnath, and Fort Collins to connect Windsor and Fort Collins. So that's been well publicized. So that's the big news there. And no new news with Parks, Recreation, Culture. We had a successful summer, a lot of work winterizing the parks and the different facilities. But a few numbers I wanted to share that Merrick provided in the meeting last week. The Community Recreation Center through September had greeted more than 298,000 people thus far this year. September brought in 26,522 visits, which is an average about 915 visits per day. In memberships in August, we had gained 343 new members. And in September, the Silver Sneakers alone accounted for 2,248 visits. And the last thing I just share that I thought was interesting, we all hear about how popular pickleball is. In 2017, we had 2,100 players at the Community Recreation Center. In 2019, so far, we have 2,903 through August alone. So just some interesting facts I wanted to share. Thank you.
Okay. Town Board Member, Mayor Pro Tem Bennett, Water and Sewer Board.
The Water and Sewer Board met last Wednesday morning, and they reviewed the data regarding raw water dedication and have made recommendations forwarded to the board regarding that.
Okay, Town Board Member Rennemeyer, Chamber of Commerce.
Madam Mayor, I was unable to attend the regular Chamber of Commerce Board meeting last Wednesday due to a conference that I was at. So I do not have an update. I have not received information from them as to how that meeting transpired. Yes, that's it. That's my full report. So sorry, I don't have more I can contribute.
Okay. Town Board Member Kozlowski, Clearview Library Board and Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing to report on the Planning Commission. I did miss the last meeting, combination of travel and illness. And in fact, in my absence, the Library Board was attended by Board Member Rennemeyer on my behalf. So I would ask him to kind of summarize what went on at the last Library Board meeting. But as you know, Saturday was also pretty much a full day of the Strategic Planning Advisory Board Advisory Group meeting, and I did attend that. So I'll speak to that a little bit if you don't mind after Mr. Rennemeyer's done.
I just had a couple of things, a couple highlights from the board meeting. It was on Thursday, September 26th. One of the big things that came out is the board unanimously approved to go fine-free. There will no longer be any fines for late materials that are checked out at the library, which was big news. They're following a trend of a lot of libraries that are going in that direction. So they have been giving grace on other materials, but anybody that has an item that's been checked out more than 45 days is sent a notice saying it's delinquent and they need to pay for the item. So this is just like if you have $3 or $4 or $5 because you were late, by a few days, et cetera, that those fees will no longer exist. So they have decided, I think it was as of October 1st, to go fine free. So some of the other things that I found a little alarming that they shared was year to date, the total number of patrons served is lower than in previous years. The patrons served at the library has been lower than in previous years, and this is exactly the terminology that they used, and they've been tracking all of this for the last 5 years according to these graphs. The bookmobile has been, the patrons served by the bookmobile has been decreasing. It says it's up from last year, but overall on a 5-year trend, it's steadily gone down. I just found these kind of interesting, and maybe Mr. Kozlowski from the meeting on Saturday will have more to share about some of their strategic initiatives that they're looking at. But anyhow, I just thought that a lot of their graphs of all the numbers that they track, program attendance is down, circulations have kind of been hovering. Anyhow, I just found it kind of interesting. I don't normally get to go to their meetings, but found that it was kind of interesting that how much of what they track, but yet they are seeing trends where it's not looking positive. And so I think that's what led to the strategic planning session that they had on Saturday. So Mr. Kozlowski can take it from there.
Thank you. Thanks for covering for me in my absence. I do know that the bookmobile was in the garage. It was both last year and this year. It's spent a fair amount of time with the air conditioning unit and some other aspects of it. So it hasn't been on the road the full summer, if you will. That certainly might account for that. But Saturday was another meeting of the Strategic Planning Advisory Group. It was about a full day, 9 to 3, 3:30. And that group is being charged with helping develop a long-term strategic plan and vision for the library, operating within their existing mission statement. So it's starting to gel, it's starting to come together. There's still a couple more meetings to be held. I think sometime in November, late November, mid-November, the advisory group will be presenting to the library board its recommendations, and then the board will be considering those recommendations for adoption. So it's coming to an end, but it's been an interesting exercise, and I know, Mayor, you've participated as well as you can. As always, check out the library's website if you want to track any of that information. It's all there.
I was going to mention, I would say it's important too, as part of that, they are going to do a community engagement outreach. Once the strategic plan information comes back to the advisory board and they approve it to go out, and I think they already set that date, but I didn't bring my notes with me, but I would watch for that, and I would encourage anybody who still, wants to make sure that their voice is heard or has, some feedback that they want to make sure, or just look at the strategic plan and make sure that is following what you are hoping that the library will do, or take that course in the future, to show up at that community outreach, because that's the opportunity. One last check-in before the advisory group presents it to the board is kind of like the final strategic plan.
And adding one more thing in that regard, Saturday there'll be all-day interviews with the interview group. There are 2 board positions open out of the 5 members to be filled. 2 term-limited members will be finishing at the end of the year. So Saturday, a group of us on the interview committee will be interviewing 7 candidates for those 2 positions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I have a Downtown Development Authority. That meeting is scheduled for this Wednesday at 7:30, so I don't have anything to report until we have that meeting. North Front Range MPO did meet on October 3rd in Loveland, and a couple of highlights from that meeting were, number one, we had a report from the Van Gogh Fair, and there is going to be an increase. They did an analysis and shows that the Van Gogh pool program is barely breaking even between revenues and expenses. MPO expects insurance premiums to go up because of the large amount of hail damage across the state and the turnover in new fleet vehicles. There has been no cost of living increase, and fares have not increased since 2016. So for these reasons, there's a recommendation for a 2% fare increase that will take effect on January 1st, 2020. That's an average increase of about $4 per month per ridership, so it's not a significant amount, but it is. And if you look at the years past, they went several years where they didn't do any increases, and so they are going to be, I think, more diligent moving forward in looking at the revenues versus costs year to year, so that if they need to, they can every year just have a gradual increase as needed to keep up with the fares and everything, to keep that department more in line. We also heard from the mobility. We had a mobility report, so a couple of things that might be of interest there. Bus staying to Broncos will return this season, leaving 4 hours prior to home games and returning half an hour after the end of the game. Round-trip tickets cost $30, and tickets can be purchased in advance. In addition, snow staying is coming back and will expand to Arapahoe Basin and the Loveland ski area, in addition to Eldora Mountain ski area. There will be 40 days of weekend and holiday service between December and April, and cost is $25 for that round-trip ride. So if you're thinking of either going down to a Bronco game or headed up to the mountains and either want to help alleviate some of the congestion on I-25, or want to have less maybe stress driving through all of that, you might consider going online and looking up at bus staying. We did approve the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. This plan is online if anybody wants to look at the far-reaching transportation report that the MPO put out. And we saw a completed summary of the 2019 public outreach that they did, visiting all of the different events in the area. They saw a huge increase this year in the community interactions, and I am happy and very proud to say that Windsor had the largest interactions of any community, with almost 800 interactions when they came and were at our Harvest Fest. So all that information is very important as they pull together data and information they need in order to determine how they're going to prioritize what projects are needed in the future. So with that, we are looking at a 10-year pipeline of projects. I think, as I might have mentioned before, CDOT is now going to a 10-year pipeline of projects. And while we always have a multitude of projects, we not always have had them where they have been prioritized. So really what the MPO is thinking is several years, or a couple years, last year actually, when we were looking at the potential transportation, those two bills that did not pass, but in hopes that they were going to pass, we had created some lists of our priorities at that time. So we gave that list to TAC. TAC is going through that list for us, and hopefully then will come back to us in our November meeting with a list of our 10-year transportation priority of plans. So we will have a whole year, a whole 10-year of pipeline of projects ready to maybe hopefully go if and when there's any money that happens to come along. So that concludes, I think, basically my report for MPO. So moving on to that, we will move on to item 6. Did we have anybody? No? Okay. So we didn't have anybody who signed up for the public invited to be heard portion. So we will move on to item B, which is the consent calendar. Is there a motion on the floor to accept the consent calendar as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rennemeyer with a second for Mr. Baker approving the consent calendar as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Consent calendar is approved unanimously as presented. Moving on to item C, board action. Our first item this evening is ordinance number 2019-1595, an ordinance amending Chapter 2 and Chapter 16 of the Windsor Municipal Code with respect to the removal of members of certain boards and commissions serving the town of Windsor. Legislative action, and Mr. McCarver will give us presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What's before you tonight is a corrected version of the ordinance that we postponed the last time it was before you because we found a typo. The typo has been corrected, and so what this ordinance does is it brings consistency and clarity to the code language that has to do with removal of members and the requirements for removal of members from town advisory boards and commissions. This ordinance was really just, the need for this ordinance was really discovered when we added youth members to certain advisory boards, and we made some changes to those code sections and then decided to make those requirements uniform code-wide. So that's what's here before you tonight.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. McCarver? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to accept the ordinance as presented?
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2019-1595.
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rennemeyer with a second for Mr. Wilson approving ordinance 2019-1595. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Moving on to item 2, a public hearing for final major subdivision, Great Western Industrial Park Subdivision, 11th filing, Dean Brown, owner applicant, and Mark Saval Redland, the applicant's representative. Quasi judicial, it looks like Ms. Malone will be giving us presentation, but first I would need a motion to open public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Motion on the floor for Mr. Redemeyer with a second for Mr. Bennett to open public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is now open. Ms. Malone.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Board. The item before you, Great Western Industrial Park, filing 11, has been reviewed in accordance with the subdivision section of the municipal code, specifically section 7410. In this situation, this is an industrial zone piece of property that is being divided into 3 lots, as well as some dedication of right-of-way. The property is located just west of County Road 23 and east of Great Western Drive. It's about half a mile south of Eastman Park Drive. The property is zoned industrial, high, and everything, all properties surrounding it as well. The total site includes just over 37 acres, and again, 3 lots are being proposed as well as right-of-way. This will provide for a non-pot system. There's also a pond proposed for the site as well as an irrigation pump and utilities. The subdivision is consistent with the comprehensive plan, chapter 5D, regarding commercial and industrial areas framework plan. There was a neighborhood meeting, and these notices shown here or this area shown here in yellow was the area notified for both the neighborhood meeting as well as the Planning Commission public hearing and this public hearing tonight. At the October 2nd meeting, 2019, the Planning Commission forwarded to the Town Board a recommendation of approval of the final major subdivision as presented, subject to Planning Commission and staff comments being addressed. Staff requests that the following be entered into the record: the resolution, application, supplemental materials, staff memorandum, supporting documents, testimony presented during the public hearing, and the recommendation. And this outlines the criteria for consideration of the subdivision. I'm happy to answer any questions. The applicant is also here as well.
Okay. Are there any questions? So I know that all of this property that we're looking at is Windsor, but it's surrounded by unincorporated Weld. It looks like, so, and we have an IGA with Weld, so did we receive any comment from Weld County at all on this, or do we need to per our IGA?
It was referred to Weld County. No conflicts with the request.
Okay.
And this area in purple here is the area.
Right.
And
So
then
that's all incorporated into Windsor.
this is right, and then here's the site in the unincorporated areas
Right, but
in
it's-
gray.
Yeah, it's surrounded.
And then this is City of Greeley.
Okay. If there are no questions from the board, did the applicant have anything they wanted to add at this point? No?
I guess not.
Okay. Well, this is the public hearing, so this would be the opportunity and time for anybody to step forward if they wish to address the board on this agenda item. Now would be the time. Okay. Seeing none, and if there are no further questions or comments, I would seek a motion to close public hearing.
So
Madam
moved.
Mayor?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just said so moved that we move into close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Okay, motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett to close public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is now closed. Moving on to Resolution 2019-67. A resolution approving the final major subdivision, Great Western Industrial Park Subdivision, 11th filing, Dean Brown, owner applicant, and Mark Saval Redland, the applicant's representative. Ms. Malone, anything further?
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing further.
Okay, anything further from the board? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion on the floor?
I move to approve Resolution 2019-67 as presented.
Second.
A motion on the floor for Mr. Wilson with a second from Mr. Baker approving Resolution 2019-67. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution carries unanimously. Moving on to item 4, Resolution 2019-68. A resolution approving and adopting the intergovernmental agreement for the operation of the Poudre Express Transit Service Project by, between, and among the City of Fort Collins, the Town of Windsor, and the City of Greeley. Legislative action, and again, we have the pleasure of having Ms. Malone give presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Board. There's quite a bit of information in your packet about this intergovernmental agreement between City of Greeley, Town of Windsor, and Fort Collins. This effort was spearheaded by Greeley Evans Transit, City of Greeley. Behind me in the back, Will Jones, City of Greeley Deputy Public Works Director, and Darren Davis, the Transit Manager for Greeley Evans Transit. They were the most involved in this process, and this has gone on for several years. We first had a work session in 2018 regarding the study for the transit route. And we had another work session this year on July 22nd. And at that time, we had a better idea of the annual cost that would be involved, as well as some of the infrastructure costs that would be responsibility of the town. In the last year, the City of Greeley became, the City of Fort Collins became a partner in this intergovernmental agreement. And as you can see within the terms of the agreement, that they are working with CSU for their portion of this route, and will also honor transfers with their system. And there's information in the packet regarding the specifications and standards that the town is planning on utilizing. That's the City of Fort Collins standards for bus stops and other amenities. There's also more information about the more specific sites and in the future site at Larimer County Road 5 and 392. So I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. And we also have, as I mentioned before, members from City of Greeley, if any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? Mr. Baker?
I have a question on the parking at the various bus stops. How is that gonna work specifically on County Road 5 and 392? There's nothing out there yet?
Right, well, that bus stop actually is not being proposed at this time because of that lack of infrastructure. So,
Right, so then when the development comes, will they be required to put in parking infrastructure, or how does?
that hasn't been determined yet at this time, but for the interim, we just didn't want to stop out there without infrastructure.
Yeah,
So,
And right now, I think the idea is that we would use existing infrastructure at every stop, so we're not putting in anything new. Obviously, like the King Supers and Safeway stops have plenty of parking lot. The other neighborhoods have less, and staff has talked about that being a little bit of a limiting factor. You want to have adequate parking so people use it, but you don't necessarily want to go and build huge parking lots until it's used. So I think that we're going to continue to monitor that. When the fourth stop, when that's considered, I think that there will be some existing development where we think we can utilize that infrastructure. So whether or not that's a public-private partnership at the time and we have them overbuild the parking, or if it's more of a big box use that has a lot of parking and we can just take advantage of that, we'll determine that at the time.
I remember from the work session, there was a lot of potential utilization out there in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder if people are going to use, like, what comes first? We don't see the usership because there's not a stop there.
right, so in the study that occurred, one of the main areas where faculty and staff lived was in the core of town, and that's the purpose behind the stop on 7th Street. And the idea was, rather than people actually driving to that stop, that they would be in walking distance or biking distance.
Makes sense.
Okay. Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, under the IGA recitals, section B, our packet, it's page 85, but it talks about if circumstances require modification of Poudre Express services, Greeley should be entitled to implement at their discretion. I'm assuming, or I'm asking, what modifications might those be? I'm assuming it might be location of the bus stops.
You're on page 5, is that correct?
No, it's
85.
85.
Page
of
page
the
two
packet.
page
It's
2 of the
Page 2
agreement.
of the IGA. And it's talking about Greeley has the authority to unilaterally make modifications, as long as it doesn't cost anything. And so I'm asking what those modifications might be. I'm guessing that might be bus locations, pickup
It
locations.
could potentially be modification of locations. It could also be timing as well.
Time, okay.
Okay. Do you want to come forward? Maybe.
The reason I'm asking is, I mean, if we're determining that the locations need to change and we've spent money on building bus stops, just something we would need to know in advance.
Yeah, definitely, and the primary purpose of that is the timing, right? So we're going off of the route timings based off of survey data that we went out through and
Right.
collecting when people were leaving, when people were, getting to work and whatnot.
Right.
So that's primarily the reason for that. Obviously, if there's changes beyond that, there's going to be, and even throughout, there's going to be constant communication with Windsor staff on any changes that may have to happen.
And the next section talks about if there are changes that would require some type of financial implications, that would be consulted on that.
Correct.
I read.
It's a conversation amongst all three communities,
Okay.
Ultimately, the goal would be that the service is hugely successful and people want more than just the 7 trips a day. So obviously, the cost and infrastructure is going to require conversation amongst all partners, and that's what it's going to really be, is that partnership and conversation.
Now, I'm not objecting to it
No,
at all. I
no,
just want to
yeah.
understand and thinking ahead that if ridership increases, we might look at additional.
I'm okay, thanks.
A couple years down the road, we might be looking at additional stops, or it's theoretically possible that the stops we think are appropriate now, we might find need to be changed.
Correct, and that's something with the technology in the buses. We'll have APCs, or automatic passenger counters, so we'll be able to tell not only where the boardings are happening, but also the deboardings. And Darren, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the new type can actually tell size as well, so that way we can really tell, I guess, am I correct in that statement? Yeah, so we'll be able to, get some, information as far as maybe age and some of that type, and we'll be able to get that with some of our other fare information as well, so.
Okay. Any additional questions? Mr. Soslowski?
Thank you, Mayor. Sir, in the agreement, there's each participant's making a cash contribution of some kind, but then there's also a reference to the fare per ride of $1.50.
Correct.
I'm just curious how your model is running in terms of, is the contribution by Windsor, for instance, being used more for CapEx, acquisition of the vehicles, et cetera? And is $1.50 more to cover the O&M then of the?
Yeah, your O&M or your operating costs, and really traditionally, or from an industry standard, your some agencies like Breckenridge and some other communities are 0% fare box recovery, right? That's just but you look at Greeley specifically, we're about 12 to 13% fare box recovery, so how much fares you're bringing in versus the operating costs. So the majority of Windsor's, as well as Fort Collins, is the operating side of stuff. Each community's, I think, got about $5,000 going towards capital replacement of buses as they get to their end of useful life. But majority of your guys' contribution is for the operations side of the table. So,
Just curious, as you guys have modeled it out, what you're feeling like the participation rate is going to be, or is there a target at $1.50 that you'd like to see in terms of ridership?
The riders per hour is what our performance measure is more based off of, and that's right around within 3 years, and that's something to keep in mind, right? Routes typically take about 3 years to fully mature, right? So it's not, our goal obviously is right out the gate, everything to be, meeting that, but it takes some time because of marketing and education and getting people on board. But 12 riders an hour, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, our fare box or our budget for, or expected dollar amount for the fares is starting off about $20,000 a year. So some of that's contribution, obviously, because CSU is paying for their students to be able to ride for free, and some of that. So that what that does is takes it off the top, and then we'll be able to share that information as the next year comes around, so you guys can see, and then that comes off the operating cost as far as your portion. So,
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's exciting.
yeah.
Yeah. Any additional questions? If not, so I just want to make a couple of comments and make mention that this is one, we did get a CDOT Faster grant for this, and this discussion did happen at MPO, so this is a project that came out of the MPO. I think we also need to extend our thanks to our community to the east, Greeley, because they really took this project forward and, made the decision that they would buy the buses and get this project going. And I know I have lots of folks in our community who are very excited and
Good.
anticipating this, especially our senior citizens. So we thank you for the partnership of Greeley. We also thank Fort Collins and CSU for stepping forward, but thank you. I think this is something that has long been looking forward to and needed in our community.
Thank you. And we'll be reaching out too as far as memorial rides and some of that stuff. So if you guys are interested in doing that or bring a bus or some variation, of that, just let us know.
Okay,
Thank you.
And with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I enthusiastically recommend approval of resolution number 2019-68.
Second.
Oh, you have to enthusiastically second.
Okay, we have a motion.
That was enthusiastic.
Motion on the floor from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett with a second from Mr. Rennemeyer to approve resolution, enthusiastically approve resolution 2019-68. All in favor, vote yes, opposed, no. And the resolution passes unanimously. Moving on to item 5, resolution number 2019-69, a resolution approving relocation of outdoor archery range. Legislative action, and Mr. Lucas is going to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Board.
Enthusiastically.
Enthusiastically. There is a resolution related to relocating the archery range to the Kodak Watchable Wildlife Area, and quite frankly, it's a cleanup because we were recently notified by a pre-cap board member that we were in violation of our own code. So that's why I'm before you tonight. A little bit of background: the original ordinance was passed in 1990. Around 2011, the Parks and Recreation and Culture Department began to offer archery classes at Eastman Park. And in 2011, and I think in 2012, there was some flooding and basically ended up canceling classes. And so came to this board in 2011 and received a temporary resolution relocating the archery range to Diamond Valley Park. And so between 2011 and up until about 2015, when I arrived, the archery range bounced back and forth depending on whether Eastman Park South flooded. And recall where the archery range was, it was down by the river. So any minor flooding flooded the archery range. In 2015 and into 16, we moved permanently the range to Diamond Valley, where it was used heavily. And then in 2018, because we were going to expand Diamond Valley Park, we moved it over to the Kodak Watchable Wildlife Area, also under the assumption that just would be a more friendly experience for folks who like to shoot their bows and arrows there, because it was more in a wooded area, not as windy, more natural setting. So that's where it's been located since 2018. So the resolution in front of you tonight is really to decommission the archery range at Eastman Park. I will tell you it doesn't exist. Relocated officially to the Kodak Watchable Wildlife Area, and just really align ourselves with the original code that was passed back in 1990. Kind of give you an idea of where it's at. So that's where folks park, and then you can see it here. That's an aerial shot of the current range at its location. There you go. And then this is the location of where people park, and the archery range is down in here. And you'll recall in our budget discussions, we're hoping to expand that range with the CPW grant next year as well. So before that is the recommendation to approve officially relocating the archery range to the Kodak Watchable Wildlife. So I can answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Lucas, Mr. Kozlowski?
Not so much a question, but a comment. Very, very nice looking facility, and it sure seems to be used quite a bit. Every time I go by, there's somebody there, so it's really nice.
Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I enthusiastically move that we approve resolution number 2019-69.
I enthusiastically second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mr. Wilson, approving resolution number 2019-69. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution passes unanimously.
I enthusiastically say thank you.
Moving on to item 6, ordinance number 2019-1893, 1996, an ordinance amending section 13-2-80, dedication of water rights. Legislative action, Mr. Thornhill is giving us presentation. Good evening.
Good evening. I expect enthusiastic approval of this as well, so let's just
Water's
keep this ball
enthusiastic,
rolling.
Yes, yes.
This is an ordinance that's basically amending portions of section 13-2-80 with respect to raw water dedications. If you recall, we came to you in September at a work session and showed you a historical water use analysis of single-family homes and their use, and then talked about shrink values and treatment and all those things that are included in that number. We also went to the Water and Sewer Board on their September meeting as well and gave them the same presentation to let them review it. We got feedback from the development community, staff as well, and from each of the boards. Went back and looked at everything a little bit closer and really looked at the newer developments, because water use is trending and continuing to go down even more than if you go back 10 years ago. So the factors that you see in front of you today are a culmination of all those things and considerations. We're looking at changing single-family residential dual use systems from 0.29 acre feet down to 0.25 acre feet. All these numbers too still include all of the shrink values that our town water master plan recommended, as well as a drought safety factor. Multifamily goes down from 0.18 acre feet down to 0.15 per dwelling unit. And then single family without separate non-potable goes down from 0.58 to 0.50 acre feet per residence. And then multifamily without non-potable irrigation systems, 0.15 acre feet and 3 acre foot per acre of irrigated landscape. So that would be part of the development review process. We would look at their irrigated areas and then assign a value for raw water dedication for that. So recommending that you approve the ordinance as amended.
Are there any questions?
I have a question about, are you gonna look at this again in a couple of years? Like, there's a chance it could go up, right? I mean,
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if everybody starts installing, 5 shower heads in their shower stalls, I guess we would make it go back up. But yes, we will be evaluating it every year.
okay, great. Yeah.
Well, and I think that we probably want to add that, as you know, the town is participating in NISP. At some point, the town is going to switch its policy from accepting wet water to just cash in lieu. And so then it'll be a little bit different. There'll be a time in our not too near future when this calculation doesn't matter as much, because we're just doing it kind of with the water tap. So we'll continue to evolve as our resources are available. So I think you're right that we should continue to look at this, because when John ran the numbers, we looked at, man, we should lower it, so.
No, it makes sense.
Yep.
And technology changes. We don't know what's coming down the pipe, so we'll have to keep on top of it.
Okay.
So,
Any additional questions, Mike? Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Becker.
Yeah, I want to talk about the financing. This reduces the amount of water that a developer that has to be dedicated. But
Correct.
it doesn't talk about the rate we would charge for that water. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because as water rates are going up, it's
There will,
possible that the rate of water will go up even though the dedication is less.
Correct.
Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Because we're not about the cash and roll and our money to buy it. Okay. I just want to make sure I understood.
Well, and Mr. Thornhill and I had that conversation as recently as today. The price of CBT continues to go so far up.
Yeah.
There's going to be a point to where the town really can't equitably benchmark our cash and lieu to CBT.
Yeah.
Because what'd you say it would scale to, like 90,000 an acre foot now?
Those are the current offers out there right now.
90?
Yep, for an acre foot, so not
It
for
was
a.
just 60.
So
No,
about
it was
62,000 per unit.
Oh.
Yeah.
But that's for 7/10 of an acre foot.
Yeah.
So.
Still, that's
That's
increase.
a lot.
So we're watching, there's gonna be some point when it's just absurd to I think it's actually it's absurd of how high CBT is. So we're gonna continue to monitor that, because we certainly don't wanna have such a chilling effect on growth, but CBT right now has been kind of our bellwether for so many years. That's historically how we've charged.
Mr. Sosowski.
You done?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Mr. Thornhill, the other component of this we talked about, I think, during one of our work sessions was the yield that was going to be assumed, and this obviously relating to CBT units, but it was the average yield, I think the 0.7, the firm yield being, I think, 0.5, and then planning yield was somewhere in between those. What's the equation going to use when in that calculation? It's
Well,
not
it
here.
kind of plays into what Shane was referring to as we move into the future and we go to 100% cash in lieu. That's really going to be based on the NISP water, if we get that record of decision and that value, and that's based on a firm yield. The CBT yield discussion was really to discuss what we have today and the credits that we've been given today, but as part of that transition to defining what that dollar amount would be per acre foot, it would also be defining what those developments would be buying in terms of that acre foot. And I think that would be the change. So it really wouldn't be looking at average yields or planning yields. We would be on a strictly 100% firm yield basis on that NISP supply. Now, if we came in and allowed other water supplies like other ditch companies or something, we would evaluate all new supplies at a firm yield basis and no longer do planning or average.
It'll be hard to enthusiastically support this because it is giving up revenue, right? So begrudgingly. Thank you for
Begrudgingly enthusiastically.
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
okay, well, we're not necessarily giving up revenue, are we? This is where I was getting to.
Assuming an equal
Okay.
price on CBT shares, you've reduced the amount.
Right. Yeah, your project cost is not going to go down, but your dedication volume's going down. So that's kind of that comment I made in there about we'd be reducing the amount of cash in lieu that we will be bringing in. So water rates are going to have to adjust. We're looking at the water rate model now. We'll be bringing that back to you in November.
Right. What we charge the development for the water, that water rate could go up.
It could.
Yeah.
It could depend, if you want
It's
to.
9,000 per acre foot now. Somewhere it's going to have to go up. So that's why my point was, that's what I wanted to understand. Are we really reducing our revenue?
Well, we
Purchase
could,
water.
because if we charge more to the development community, it's because our
Right.
prices have gone up.
Right.
So it's whether it's a multiplier of 0.29 or 0.25.
Right.
And so comparatively, the development community would pay less under this proposed ordinance than it would under the current regs. But when the rubber meets the road, their checks,
Right.
they may feel like they're writing the same
That's
amount
right,
because
right.
water keeps on going up.
Because the water rate went up.
Yeah.
The purchase of the water went up, even though the dedication went down.
Right.
That's right.
That's where I'm
Correct.
going.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
But at an equal price, you will get less money.
If at an equal. Right, yeah, okay.
Okay. Any further questions or conversation? If not, is there a motion?
I just normally move that we approve ordinance number 2019-1596.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett, approving ordinance 2019-1596. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the ordinance carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 7, resolution number 2019-70. A resolution in support of Windsor Severance Fire District's referred ballot measure 7A on the November 2019 general election ballot in Larimer and Weld counties. Mr. Hale.
Thank you, Your Honor. So first, I would just say that there are a couple of firemen behind me that will be really disappointed if you're not enthusiastic about your vote on this one. They have been paying attention. On August 8th, the Windsor Severance Fire District's Board of Directors adopted a resolution directing a tax increase ballot issue be submitted to the fire district voters during the coordinated election in Weld and Larimer counties on November 5th of 2019. This tax increase would support personnel and equipment for 2 new fire stations. as well as increase emergency response times. Attached are the resolution being submitted, as well as an attachment which is the referred 7A ballot language. And as I stated before, we do have Chief Kazian and Mr. Blackwell behind me that I think are here to possibly present or at least answer any questions you may have.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, Town Manager Hale. Madam Mayor, members of the Town Board, thank you for having me today. Chief
Yeah,
Blackwell and I are
thanks
here.
for taking time out of your moving schedule to be here, I understand, yes. So
thank you
we
for that.
appreciate you.
I was able to get here just in time.
Okay.
So thank you for having me. I'm not sure, Madam Mayor, how you'd like me to proceed with some information I can share with you, or?
Yep, however you wish.
Excellent. Well, sitting through your first proclamation, I believe that talked about October being the National Community Planning Month. Couldn't be more perfect timing. In your proclamation, it clearly said improvement of our community and community planning. And that's exactly what we're here today to talk about with the Windsor Severance Fire Rescue, looking to improve our community and our response times. This is 7A is a ballot measure that's out to the community. I believe ballots have already hit the mailbox. Mine's in forwarding, so I haven't seen it yet. But really what it amounts to being is it's a mill rate increase of 3 parts. So in 2020, we're asking 0.556, which will take us from 7.194 mils to a nice 7.75. In 23, we'll be asked the one question, but it'll give us another half a mil in 23 and another half a mil in 26. Very strategically planned by our board and our team. We're asking for just a little bit each of these 3 increases because that's really what we need. Probably in some ways it would have been easier just to ask for 1 mil right now and it'd be cleaner and just be cleaner, but we don't need 1 mil right now. We really need just a half a mil. In 23, we actually will see a reduction by our bond that was approved by the voters in 2008. They also approved a mill rate increase. That was our last mill increase. That was a 2.25 mil increase in 2008 and a bond, both passed. And that bond comes off of the tax rolls in 23. So right now, I think it's about 0.38, if I'm not mistaken, is what our bond payment is. So it'll probably go down a little bit lower than that because of our assessed value up and the number of people in town. So whatever that is, I can't predict that. But let's say it's 0.35. You'll really only realize a 0.15 mill rate increase. So very, very small. That tax, the mill rate increase right now for a $300,000 home is about $11 in 2020 and a couple dollars in 23 because of the bond coming off, and about another $11 in 2026. So essentially by the time 2026 comes along for a $300,000 home, it's about $25 is the total net essentially, if in round numbers there. As Town Manager mentioned in your resolution, we're looking to build 2 fire stations. We know First Station is identified for Hilltop and New Liberty, which is an intersection right there just east of the kind of top of the hill, right outside the Raindance subdivision. It would proudly serve Water Valley South. It would serve Bryson Ridge. It would serve Steeplechase, High Point, certainly Raindance as well. Out to Ames Community College and that area to the south near 34 where we cover very well. What's interesting to note is that that's a fire station being in your local neighborhood community is important, and it's certainly all about response times. But because of our response times and how we're situated, right now our station number 1 holds the majority of our calls, so about 1,800 calls a year. Lots of nursing homes we go to, lots of all over the south end of this town. Well, that means that every time we're further and further south, when we have another call in town, one of the other neighboring stations has to come. Longer response time, so keeping Station 1 in its home base, so to speak, and having Station 4 handle those southern calls rather, will create a reliability, we call it, for our units, and also reduce our response times. We took data from 2016 to 2018. We overlaid that data if Station 4 existed, and that data shows that we would have reduced response times an estimated 85 hours of emergency response to our community in just 1 year. So think about that. We have about 3,700 calls a year. We're going to reduce our response times by 85 hours by adding this other station. That means we get to you quicker, and also means we're less on the road. One of our most dangerous parts of our job is driving to the scene. And so we're going to reduce that for both the community and for our first responders. Station number 5, so there's 2 stations that we're identifying that we need to do based upon projections and the growth that we've seen. And that isn't been determined where that would be. It could be somewhere out to the east, 392 and 23 kind of area there. Severance has some fairly large subdivisions that are looking they're platted and are looking to see if that happens. So really where the growth goes could take us that way, which would be nice because that gets us into the industrial park with a little better coverage here for the town of Windsor. Or we're looking to go a little bit out to the north, 257 and 78 kind of area. But again, it really depends on where that growth is. We'll be using data to determine that. We know the data for station number 4. Station number 5 tells us we need to do something. We just don't know where it's going to be. I don't have much more to add. I'd certainly entertain questions, trying to make it short and sweet for you as you have enthusiastically been engaged on many of these resolutions. I'm here to answer any questions enthusiastically as I can.
Okay, Mr. Baker.
Well, thank you for coming tonight. What do you tell those residents that say, the growth should pay for itself? Why do I have to pay? Shouldn't the new development pay for the new station?
That's a great question. I've answered that about 1,000 times, I think.
Figured so.
So it's interesting. So with Gallagher, we realized about $450 million worth of new residential growth this fiscal year with the new growth and the assessed value, all in new growth. This is all we're talking about, new growth, not the assessed value. I apologize. Because we multiply that by the 7.15 of Gallagher, we end up with about $23 million of actually realized assessed value. And we multiply that by our mill rate, we get about $180,000 new money. A firefighter, we started firefighters at $53,000. Not a bad salary, but certainly not anything that's outrageous by any means. And certainly compared to our neighbors, it's not even near the highest. It's actually fairly low. By the time we train them, put them through the training, we ballpark about $90,000 to $100,000 a firefighter. So we can get 2 firefighters for the new growth in residential. It's about Gallagher, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
I think about where I came from. We didn't have that, so I would take $450 million. I would not be coming to the community asking for a small increase like we are, and we'd be trying to find something to do with that kind of money. So Gallagher works very well in that capacity, but it also creates downstream impacts for us. So that's my answer for those folks.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr.
Yes.
Sosowski.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, if you could, 2 things. First is I read this November ballot information, and I don't know whether the attachment here was the final language, because it references the initial 2010.556. The second .5, at least here, says 2022, not 2023.
So we're voting in 19.
But it'll
22
happen.
and 25 is the way, it's the budget, it's just the way the table or the requirements are for the law. But if we vote in 2019, it takes effect in 20, and if it takes effect in 23, it takes effect in 26.
Just wanted to make
So,
sure.
legal language
Anyone listening wouldn't be
Thank you for that.
confused by that.
I was very confused and took a while to figure that out myself.
But you also, you're referencing the 3.1 million. Obviously, this will be subject to Gallagher adjustments going forward, so hard to predict the actual cash raised.
So what we did, and by law and by our legal counsel, we took our growth, because it's got 3 steps and it's over 7 years essentially, 6-7 years now. We took a 5% growth of our assessed value. We look historically, that's what it's been over the last 8 years for residential, like 5.3%. So we took that number and aggregated that out over time and multiplied that out by our mill rate. By what that will be, and that's where by Tabor, you have to be the truth and taxation piece of that. we're estimating that there'll be a $3.1 million increase.
Right.
We plan to add about 24 firefighters, so if you do the math I mentioned earlier, that's about 2.4 million. Most of our infrastructure will be purchasing, will be paid for cash at this point. We opted to not go with a bond because of the interest payment that our taxpayers would pay. Instead, we opted to kind of flip it around and say, we'll do the $500,000 increase essentially to help fund those people as we need the people. So it's kind of like a bond, but it's not a bond. And we really wanted to save what would have been, 7 figures in interest for certain if we were to bond out the capital needs that we had. So oil and gas one-time funding will help for one-time purchases, and these 3 bumps will help us with personnel costs.
And I think that was one of the key points, at least for me, was really this is an extremely fiscally prudent approach, that you're raising 3.1 million that is to do 2 fire stations, staffing and equipment. So there's a significant cash participation by the district already.
Correct.
In order to accomplish all this. So kudos to you for kind of, I think, being very prudent with taxpayer dollars in your approach to these projects. And I believe that there's a slide presentation on your website if anybody would like to go and look at it that really covers this in more detail.
There's a couple PowerPoint presentations that we enthusiastically put together back in April and May. And if you look at our mill rate, I don't think a mill rate is anything like a badge of honor. That means it's a multiplication number, so it has to do with where we are and what our assessed value is and all those type of things. But our mill rate is the lowest. Again, it doesn't mean anything more than it's the lowest. But we've been fiscally responsible. We've not asked the taxpayers for a tax increase in over 10 years. And again, it'll be a 1.556 at the end of 6 or 7 years. And so that's very important to us to again be fiscally responsible and ask for what we need.
Okay, Mr. Redemeyer?
Chief Kazian, is there going to be paramedics at every, stationed at every location?
So our intent, we currently work with UC Health for that. And so that's in Station 1 and Station 2 currently. Station 3 out on the west end of town, that's actually Thompson Valley EMS. So that does not have EMS in it. They have their own EMS station currently by the event center. Okay. Our intent is to have an ambulance at this location as well, the new location. Station 5, I can't speak to that yet. Again, I don't know what the data will tell us. But Station 4, we definitely intend to have an EMS unit at that location.
UC Health?
UC Health at this point, that's who has the contract, and that's what we plan to do. And we've been working with them and having that conversation as well.
Thank you.
Any further? Mr. Wilson?
Just comment, commend you on the location, the potential location on New Liberty.
Yes.
I been able to attend some meetings with you guys and see your presentations and read the materials. I think it's a great location, serving the Water Valley South as well as the County Road 13 rain dance corridor area there. And so I did get my ballot over the weekend. I did vote for this, and I mailed it this morning. So I'm on the Larimer County side of the road, and I'm encouraging other people to do so as well. I think one thing that's resonated in my neighborhood, if people ask me about it, is the improved service that they will see. And also pointing out that not just that people in the close proximity to a new station, but it really, one thing you pointed out before is how it's improved service system-wide when you add that station, because it frees up other resources to better serve other areas as well. So I just wanted to thank for your thoughtfulness and how you spaced it out and the planning that has gone into it.
So thank you very much. And so that is also the important part, is if you do have a very bad day and you have an actual fire event, specifically if you're off County Road 13 there, Station 4, Station 3, and Station 1 will be able to arrive on scene in considerably better time than we currently can do and provide much more effective work with, with 9 to 12 firefighters on scene in about 6.5, 7 minutes, if I remember correctly, what the time frame is, because now it'd be 10 to 11 minutes probably before we could get that kind of punch on a fire, as we kind of call it. So I have some handouts. If anyone would like any handouts, I certainly can give them to you, but I do thank you for your support.
Okay. Well, Mr. Baker's
I apologize, this is probably off topic, or it is off topic. Do you monitor the response time for the EMS out of Thompson? Do you guys get reports on that like you would internally?
We get great reports from UC Health. We work with them. They live in our fire stations. We work with them. I have Chief Blackwell with me, and I don't know, I've not seen a Thompson Valley EMS.
We monitor those times, but we don't get the report from Thompson Valley. We've got a really good working relationship with UCH. Not that we don't have a good one with Thompson Valley, but through our accreditation process, we've been able to get those reports from UCH, and we've been able to fine tune those. So we'll be working on Thompson Valley as well to see if we can get some similar reports from them.
Okay, thank you.
And if you have some additional material, you can hand them to Ms. Iker. But I too want to just reflect what my colleagues have said. Happy that I was able to refer this, and again, this resolution, and will heartily be in support of it. This, along with, I think, our police, are what makes Windsor such a safe and good place to be. And it's the hardworking, dedicated team that you all have, and as everybody has reflected, and handling it all so fiscally responsible, I think, for our citizens is an added bonus to us, because we certainly have never seen anything less than A+ service from you all. And so I certainly hope that, like Mr. Wilson stated, that much of our residents will be encouraged to come forth and support this as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And with that, I would seek a motion on the floor for resolution number 2019-70.
I enthusiastically support resolution number 2019-70.
Second.
A motion on the floor for Mr. Renemeyer with a second, Mr. Baker, approving resolution 2019-70 enthusiastically. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And it passes unanimously. Moving on to item B8, our finance report for August 2019. Mr. Moyer.
Well, excuse me, in keeping with the enthusiasm, I'm hoping that when I'm done with this, y'all are standing and cheering. So see if I can get it done.
We will be, but just because you're done.
I'll take all the extras.
However I can get it, right? It is a good news report, as most of them have been this year. Both sales and construction use tax is up over last year. The retail sales 14% over last year, and the construction use 64% over last year. Our three largest tax collections, sales, use, and property tax, are well ahead of the benchmarks at the end of August, which is 67%. The property tax, we are about finished collecting for the year, which is not unusual. We usually are done with that by July. Our sales tax collections are averaging roughly $1.3 million per month. As we talked in the work session tonight, we are issuing a lot of new business licenses, and many of them have no physical presence here in Windsor. The largest physical presence here in Windsor that produces the most sales tax continues to be the King Soopers Plaza. So moving on to the expenditures, O&M is at 57% of the 67% benchmark. Drainage operations are a little ahead of the benchmark at 69 because of the earlier SRSA payment earlier this year. And that was our annual payment. That was the drainage funds portion of it. And we don't have a lot of operating expense in the drainage fund. So that payment on its own made it get ahead of the pace a little bit. Not very much, but a little. CIP projects are at 23.65 of the budget. That seems like we're lagging behind the benchmark, which we are, but I will say that in September and October, I've signed some awfully large checks to pay for projects that we were either completed or are ongoing, and we're closing up for the summer. So the expenditures combined are at 42% of the benchmark. of 67. And I expect, as I mentioned, that we'll keep paying for projects and we'll get closer to the benchmark at the end of the year. So that being said, I would answer any questions, but that is my report for August this evening.
Any questions for Mr. Moyer? Mr. Baker?
Yeah, for the geocode Brands East, is that gross or net? I think I've asked before.
I'm sorry?
The geocode for Brands East, is that the gross amount we've collected or the net after the rebate to them?
You asked me that.
I did ask.
I think it's gross. I think that's a gross amount. You did ask it last time we looked into it, and I'm pretty sure that's gross. It doesn't reflect the checks back to the agreement.
Could we get the net?
Yeah, I think I put it in one of my weekly updates after the last time you asked. But I was going to include that in my weekly update in the coming weeks.
Okay.
It's time to, it's because it's time to pay them again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Bennett?
The geocode, the red line, red bar represents revenue in 2018. Is that for the entire year of 2018 or up through August?
Through August.
Okay, so that's an apples to apples comparison. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
As you can see in that chart, the ones with the greatest dollar variances to 2018, no location is 190, that plus 191,000 there.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Rennemeyer?
I just saw this really quick. It doesn't look like mobile food vendors are they not turning any sales tax in? Is that on the honor system? Do we?
I'm sorry, where do you see
He's talking about mobile food. So those would probably be coded no location if they're like more of a mobile return.
Oh, that too, and we just, that's a new one that we just started.
Oh,
And I think
he has a specific line on there
Yeah.
for mobile food vendors. That's why I was asking.
on the top of this one.
Oh, okay, I was on the wrong
I
chart.
think what happened with that, Paul, is that we didn't establish that code until earlier this year.
Oh, okay.
And I think through the summer, I'm gonna say that they are quarterly remitters, so they may not, this is through August numbers, so I expect that in my next report, there will be a line for them.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Suslowski?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Moyer, on the August year-to-date 11 sources of revenue, top 11 sources, I'm curious, when I think about the oil and gas industry, of course, it may be hiding in the property tax amount, but obviously there's a severance tax or a royalty that might be in there as well. Is it just not in the top 11, or are they kind of hiding in some of these other categories?
Well, they are actually not in the top 11. The severance tax, I think this year came in at less than $1 million. The royalties are far less than the recreation revenue. But I can double check on that for you.
Just curious,
Yeah.
just for that industry.
Sure.
What it's looking like for 2019. Thank you.
And there again, come to think of it, I think they notified us what we were going to get for severance tax in August. We did not receive the check until September.
Yeah.
But Dean, you're right. It is less than $1 million, though. It's not. It's not as much as you. It's less than $1 million annually for the severance tax.
And they have property tax too, right? Is that in
Yeah,
this?
it would be included in
the
that property tax
6.7?
number. Yes, sir.
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Well, thank you for a good report, Mr. Moran.
Thank you.
We'll move on to communications. Communications from our town attorney.
Nothing other than 2 executive sessions tonight.
Communications from town staff. Ms. Malone, anything else? Mr. Ballstad? Mr. Lucas? Chief? Mr. Thornhill? Okay, communications from our town manager.
Yes, Mayor. So I did mention during our work session, as a reminder, I will be leaving at the end of this week on the 18th to go to the International City and County Managers Association Conference. So I'll fly out on the 18th. I will come back in on the 23rd. In the interim, Mr. Moyer will be the acting town manager. So I've left his cell phone, pager, all that data in the weekly update. And he is a night owl, so really there's no bad time to call him. So, thank you.
Okay. Communications from town board. Anybody have anything? Mr. Rittmeyer.
I had a question for staff. When is New Liberty going to open at County Road 13? You know, that where we had the crossover for the detour and everything?
Yeah, because we announced at CML it was opening
Right,
the
well,
next
it
day.
is, they just have that one lane,
It's
so.
3/4 open.
Yeah.
I know, but it is, I don't call that open.
It's not really open because it's
I
still.
don't call
You
that
know,
open.
John?
Till it's really
Okay,
open.
come on, somebody come forward.
Put your career on the line.
That was a big sigh, that wasn't enthusiastic. That
I think it's supposed to open up this week, or at the latest next week. They're just finishing up some curb and gutter on that, so it should be open fairly soon. That last third or quarter of the route.
Have they been hauling out the dirt? I mean, they had, what, 5 feet of dirt that they brought in there?
Cleaning it all up and finishing up the curb and gutter and some of that work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? The only thing I have is Coffee with the Mayor is this coming Saturday at the Starbucks in Safeway. Make sure you go to the one in Safeway. Our special guest will be Public Works, Brian Rowe. We'll be talking about all the things that you might want to talk about pertaining to Public Works. So we're going to seek a motion now to move into executive session. And if we get that and move, we will take a 10-minute recess though before
And
we
we're gonna go
report.
into the second floor.
We're going to go down to the second floor.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So with that, Mr. Soslowski.
Yes, Mayor, just to remind you, I believe the executive session topic is one where, after talking with Mr. McCarter, I concluded I may have potential conflict. So this, I will be participating in the vote to enter the executive session, but not participating in the session itself.
Okay. Okay.
With that, I move that we move into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4, E and I, for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with respect to raw water dedications. Do we take them as one or go and take?
You can combine them.
Okay, combined with a second executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4 and B as in boy, to confer with the town attorney for purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions. Oh, concerning raw water dedication, sorry.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
So moved.
Okay, and we have a second. A motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer with a second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett to move into executive session. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Passes unanimously, and so we'll be headed down there in just a few minutes.